Welcome to the lighter side of the dark side. It's your weekly freak show here on Renegade Radio and all podcast catchers, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeart Radio, YouTube, everywhere you're listening to us and watching us. It's the Dark Mark Show. I am Dark Mark, the goth comedian, and as some people know, I've got my hands full doing something in life other than art, and it's been taking up my time. So I haven't posted podcasts every week and had the regular show. So what I've been doing is I've been getting friends over to discuss movies. And the first one was Alien versus Predator, which we discussed with Nicole Six. The second was Jason Takes Manhattan, which we discussed with Hannah Bach and horror director Dustin Ferguson. And in the great tradition of Alien versus Predator and Jason Takes Manhattan, we're actually going to be discussing actually a movie that one of my favorite movies that I went and saw last month with this person. You know them. They have been on the show before. So many talents, so many things. Dancer, psychic, comedian, model. What else do? You do so many things. A multimedia artist. It's Faunt.
Yes. Hi.
What did I leave out, El?
No, you covered it. I was about to say multimedia artist, but you got that too. So
right.
And I recently shot a music video just because
so
I was asked
too.
to. So, no, I did not. I have to be fair. I did not direct it. There was already direction coming from someone else. But I did do the cinematography. So
okay, cinematographer.
Yeah.
Comedian, dancer, actress, actor. Excuse me. So. I had to get that one out of the way so it won't happen again the rest of the show. Anyway, so we're going to talk Lost Highway. Now, before we do, I got to tell you something. I really have to wake up. It's 8 o'clock, and it's about time for me to go to bed, but I'm going to stay up for the show because of this. Ray's energy drink, my favorite energy drink. It's the best. This is the Galaxy Burst. This tastes like Fruity Pebbles, and the best part of it, 0 calories. 0 carbs, 0 crash, and it's delicious. It'll keep you up. You go to the description in your podcast catcher or on YouTube, or you're catching this on YouTube, and you get 15% off a case. 15% off the case of the best energy drink you can't find in 7-Elevens, can't find it in stores. 0 calories, 0 carbs, 0 crash, 0 dyes. Delicious taste, and it'll keep you up all night. So, which I guess maybe a couple characters in this movie probably could use it. Now, it was about in August you had said something out that you wanted to see the Lost Highway for it's a 25th year anniversary. So they put out the 4K version in theaters. Now, what prompted you? Because I'll start off because we were talking after the movie, and I said I wanted you to come on and talk to me about it, and you said, "Well, I don't know because I'm not a big David Lynch super fan."
Well, okay, I want to be clear. I am a fan of David Lynch's. I just felt that kind of like I'm not the world's biggest David Lynch expert. And, you and I live in LA, and there are a lot of like cinema aficionados here, and like my focus has been in a lot of artistic places. And I enjoy going to the movies. And like I said, I love David Lynch's work. It's definitely inspiring. And I'm a huge fan. But I guess I was kind of surprised that you asked me, because I was like, all right, like I'm not necessarily the person who wears David Lynch superfan on my sleeve. But at the same time, there's definitely like a Venn diagram within David Lynch's work of stuff I like the fact that, Trent Reznor of 9 Inch Nails helped to produce the soundtrack and everything like that, and curate the soundtrack. And it's an amazing soundtrack. It is one of my all-time favorite picks for movie soundtracks, in my opinion.
I would go along with that. We're going to talk about that. Do I fit the Venn diagram of a David Lynch superfan?
Probably. I mean, I guess I could say, like, I watched the original Twin Peaks not when it was on because I was just a tiny little bit too young,
Right.
but when it came to Netflix, I believe. And so I watched the original. I think I've seen the Fire Walk with Me movie, if I'm not mistaken. I have
Uh,
not seen the recent Twin Peaks season.
well, it's yeah. We're gonna talk about all that, but I have seen every David Lynch movie. I don't know if I qualify as a super fan, but I've seen it except for the Straight Story. I've seen them all.
Oh, I have a story about that.
Oh, please.
So funny story. That same night that you and I went to see Lost Highway together,
Hmm.
I peripherally kind of invited another friend of mine along because I know he's into David Lynch's stuff. And it was that evening, just a few weeks ago, like sometime in August, that he
Hmm.
told me about the movie Straight Story
Right.
and that it existed and that David Lynch had tried to like put together some PG rated movie for Disney.
It
And
was
I
actually
was like,
G rated, if I recall
yeah,
correctly.
yeah. And I was like, this is a joke, right? Like you're making fun of me right now because you don't think I know about David Lynch movies. And he was like, no, this is real. It's on Disney Plus.
Hmm.
So shortly thereafter, my partner and I tried to watch Straight Story. Unfortunately, we did not make it all the way through. I think we got through like roughly 30 minutes. Um, the beginning definitely kind of dragged.
Okay.
It was not an engaging watch, and like for the attention span that I know kids have nowadays,
Right.
I'm like, okay, I I don't know that this was for kids. I think this might have been for people coming down off drugs in the 90s.
Well, I don't think it's for kids or people coming off drugs either. I think it's for older audiences because if I recall, it's
Maybe?
about an older man who
Yes.
drives. It's a true story, apparently.
Yeah,
Drives a
yeah.
tractor across country to see his brother who's dying, and Richard Farnsworth, the star, was nominated for an Oscar. And apparently, I hear it's really good, but I don't know if. Well, we did see the. I was going to say I don't know if people have the attention span for Lost Highway these days, but then again, we
Mm,
were in the theater largely with millennials, and we'll talk about some of their reaction. But
yeah.
no, I'm glad because it literally is one of my favorite movies. It's my favorite David Lynch movie. I know you prefer Blue Velvet, and that's definitely up there. But I mean, I got to be honest. I'm going to piss off all the David Lynch super fans right off the bat and declare myself not the super fan because I've got to be honest. I like scenes of Eraserhead, but I don't like it as a movie.
I have never gotten around to seeing that one. So
It's a
unfortunately
rough.
I
It's
can't.
a rough one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a.
Okay.
It's. I mean, he filmed it over several years,
Hmm.
and and like I say, there are scenes that are really good, but there's no story.
Mm,
And I mean, there is a story, but it doesn't hold together in my opinion. But
okay.
there are some scenes that are great. I do like The Elephant Man, which is his first studio movie. I think that's really good.
I've heard
It,
good things about that one for sure. Yeah.
yeah, but that's even though that's mainstream, there's some weird surreal touches to that. But the performances are great. Dune sucks. Blue Velvet's great.
Yeah, actually, that's another thing. I don't think I've ever made it 100% of the way through Dune.
That's another rough one.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I saw the new Dune, and wasn't that engaged with that one either. I mean,
Okay.
it's the story, and I just don't think I responded. So I remember when I was a kid, I tried to read Dune, and so I heard great things, and I couldn't. Yeah, it wasn't for me.
I know
Uh,
a lot of people who enjoyed the books of Dune. And actually, because of the people I knew who loved the books of Dune so much, because they talked it up so much, and they were like, "Oh, you have to see the movie, you have to see the movie." And then I watched the movie, I was like, don't totally see what the big deal is about, but okay."
I'm with you. I don't see the big deal. I mean, I
Yeah,
understand how Star Wars was influenced by it and other things,
right, right.
but that doesn't mean it itself is great. But if people like it, that's fine. So David Lynch is doing sucks even by his estimation. But the good thing about that is he really from that he started his real glorious period, which was Blue Velvet, which is a great movie. I can watch that scene with Dean Stockwell singing on a loop. I love that whole thing. Then Twin Peaks was the big. I mean, that's where he really entered the zeitgeist.
Mhm.
And I was really young when that came out, but I do remember my mom watching it. I do remember, like, I was a kid, but I remember the little person coming out in the third episode, and it was like the weirdest thing ever. But it seemed like if just, I mean, it's a long time ago, but if I recall, people just it was a sensation like the first 3 weeks, and it's not like now where you know everybody binge watches everything. You had to wait a week, and I think people tuned out after 3 or 4 weeks. They just got too weird for them.
Yeah, weirdly enough, it's like I said, I never watched it when it was like live in real time being broadcast. But my mom used to go visit this like elderly Romanian professor in like Garden Grove.
Hmm.
And she would bring me along with her, and he would have like these stacks of TV guides
Right.
that he had in his apartment. And so my pastime, because this was like pre cell phones, tablets, obviously, but my
Because that's what we had to do
pastime,
was TV Guide.
right, my pastime while she was visiting with him was reading TV guides. And like every TV guide was just rabid about Twin Peaks this, Twin Peaks that. That's what I remember from that time period.
And Twin Peaks was very influential on a lot of things, obviously on style,
Hmm.
which is a lot of retro style. But I mean, all the shows that came out of it, Northern Exposure, the Picket Fences, and a miniseries, Wild Palms, which I'll get to a little later on because it is some weird stuff going on. But and then and then he did Wild at Heart, which I don't like. I
Hmm.
don't like that. But it's Nicolas Cage. I'm not a big. If it's Nicolas Cage, he stops the movie and it distracts every time I watch it. But
Yeah.
there are scenes in there that are great. I think William Dafoe, Crispin Glover, Sherilyn Fenn, like, are really good, but they're not the main characters. So,
Gotcha.
are you
Yeah.
ever too Wild at Heart?
I don't think I've ever seen it. I'm trying to like scan my brain. It's one of those. If I
It's
had it, it was like a snippet on TV or in the background of something, but I definitely have not like sat down and watched it.
Nicolas
Um,
Cage doing a bad Elvis imitation and Laura Dern doing a bad Marilyn Monroe imitation, and
oh wow.
yeah, it's pretty wild, and I haven't seen it in a long time. But every time I watch it, like every good scene, there's a horrible scene afterwards, and doesn't. But it was written by it's based on a novel by Barry Gifford, who co-wrote Lost Hive.
Hmm.
So and then he did Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, which in a weird way, I actually prefer to the series, and it's completely different.
Yeah.
I find that a very powerful movie. You've never seen that movie.
I remember I think I watched it at some point, but it was one of those things where I watched it, I think at the tail end, like after I had watched all of the original Twin Peaks all the way through. So I don't remember a lot of specifics about it, about that particular one, but I do remember enjoying it. And
Yeah,
yeah,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, no, I just remembered like it definitely was like more of a standalone plot line
Right.
versus the ongoing shtick with Laura Palmer and
Well,
whatever.
he basically made a pretty bold move, which was that he cut out a lot of the wacky characters
Uh-huh.
and really focused on this incestuous relationship. I mean, it's a movie about the effects of incest on a young lady,
Mhm.
with all the surrealism and weird touches. But that's basically somebody who's just been shattered by that, and to me,
Yeah.
that's what a really powerful movie. And I think Cheryl Lee gives a great performance, and it just I think I saw the movie before I saw the show for the most part. Like I said, when I was a kid, it was on in the background, but I saw it before I actually binge watched the show. And a lot of people, I mean, people hated
Mm.
it, horrible reviews, no box office. Quentin Tarantino says like the worst thing he's ever seen. Like he was a pariah because of that. And then it took him 5 years to make another movie, and this movie is the one we're discussing now. And then he's only made two movies since, which was Mulholland Drive, which is very similar to Lost Highway. Most people find it superior to Lost Highway. I like
Yeah.
Highway better.
Yeah.
And Inland Empire, which is that's that's a crazy one to get to. Once again,
Was Inland Empire a series or
no,
was it a
it was a
movie?
standalone 3-hour movie. I saw that in the movie theater in
Okay.
2006, and I took a
Okay.
date, and I'm not sure if she wanted to be with me. She really didn't want to see the movie, but it's a weird movie because it was him doing all digital, and some of the digital looks really bad,
Mm.
like really like camcorder, like 80s camcorder quality, and some of it is lit and looks amazing. And he actually in the middle of the movie he put some scenes of his Rabbits TV, a little web series that he had on online where he had people dressed up in rabbit heads, and it was so that's interspersed in the movie.
That is so David Lynch.
It's Laura Dern plays like three different parts, or does she? And then there's a whole subplot in Poland in Polish, which is shot amazingly. But you know, some of the, I mean, they have like bad close-ups of people like this, and it's not even Zoom quality. It's like horrible quality. It's really weird.
Wow.
But it's weird for the sake of weird. And he even says, like he says that Mulholland Drive and Lost Highway, there is a, you know, it's open to interpretation, and you know, it's designed to be. But Inland Empire, he even says, look, we were just kind of making it up. And so there's like you know, he just like threw a bunch of stuff together, and it's I guess, you know, I'm sure there's people online that have theories that make sense, but it doesn't make sense.
So Inland Empire was Lynch's Because I Can movie.
It was yeah, it was the well,
Because I
Mulholland Drive
can.
was a big hit. I could do whatever I want. But basically, he was just like, he had friends over, and he would like, you know, he had like these little, I guess he would just write out some certain scenes and have them perform, and Laura Dern would come over, and you know, and just all these people that he's worked with would come over, and he would do these scenes, and then just kind of cobble them together. I think if I had to guess, I think he was working on something, and the whole Polish thing was a real movie, and then he kind of I don't know, like the whole thing starts. William Macy has one scene where he's an announcer of a talk show,
Hmm.
and he's never in the movie again. Jeremy Irons has like two scenes that he's never in the movie again. It's like, it's so weird.
Wow.
Like literally, the William H Macy, his whole scene is like, and everybody, welcome to the show, and you never see him again. And it's
That's
William
so
H. Macy.
weird. It
So
sounds
weird.
like a cut up, like a collage.
It really is,
of
and
a movie.
how it relates to Lost Highways, there's a scene, and this is probably one of the maybe the best scene in the movie is uh, they're rehearsing, and Laura Dern sees these figures in the background, and then later on in the movie, you see it from her perspective, and she's one of the figures. She's the figure in the back. So it's it's a Mobius strip that comes back around. So anyway, all of that, we're going to talk about Lost Highway now. Had you seen it in the theater before?
That's a good question. Um, hmm. I honestly,
You would have been
I
very
can't
young when it
remember.
was in the
Yeah,
theater.
I would have been in high school. I think I actually did make it out to go to a theater and see it. It would have, I think it was like an art house type thing.
Right.
At the time, it was a little bit limited release. But I feel like I did initially see it in the theater.
And kids, those were the days, because that's because I saw it in the theater too, and I was it was, I think it was between high school and college. I know I was
Hmm.
17, so I don't know if I was in high school or college, but I know like there were, you know, a lot. I would go to independent movies all the time. I wish there were still independent movies out instead of superhero movies now, because it's like it was so great. It's just some were good, some were bad, but they were all fairly interesting.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but you know, I was even looking into seeing Clerks 3 because I remember I have fond memories of seeing Clerks and Clerks 2 in the theater, and then they have like a limited engagement. You got to pay $28. I'm like, oh no, thanks. I'll wait for
Yeah.
it to come on streaming. Um, but anyway, I remember distinctly seeing this and just just being blown away. And it's taken me years and years and years to come up with an interpretation. And I don't know if you want to save the interpretations for the end or you want to do it now. Like, what is your interpretation? What happens?
That's up to you. So I will admit that I just like after you and I went to the movie theater to see it, I rewatched it one more time
Right.
just to kind of like watch it back to back with itself.
Right.
I feel that it's very much a loop,
Mm-hmm.
just kind of like how you were saying that I think it was Inland Empire was sort of a loop, but it's very much a loop. I jokingly said to my partner that between, I think his name is Peter, Fred, and Mr. Eddie,
Right.
it's a fuckboy at 3 stages of his life.
See, I never thought of it because I was thinking like maybe
But
maybe
okay,
Fred
so
was going into his younger
but
self, but I
that's just
didn't.
kind of like the surface reading. I think if you're actually trying to find something linear in the plot, um, I think that the mystery man, aka Robert Blake, the actor, is really kind of pulling the strings with all of these characters. So part of it is that it's a movie about like creating characters and like making performance. And the mystery man is very much that.
Mystery Man is very goth, by the way. I tend to, I like to use him as inspiration for my appearances when I do my act, but you know, with the makeup. But he's very goth.
Yeah, he is, and basically, I think that Fred somehow like potentially, and I need to credit my partner Rust for like offering his view on this, and we sort of had a big back and forth about it, but at some point in time I feel like Fred, the Bill Pullman character, is somehow dissociated and is placed into like Peter. I think the character's name is Peter, the younger guy.
Right. Played by
Balthazar Getty.
Getty.
Yeah.
Who's never seen again, really. I've never seen another movie again. But yeah.
Yeah. And so I think he's sort of like displaced into Pete's timeline. And then like I personally think that Alice, aka Renee, basically like the only substantial feminine character in the movie, and Mr. Eddie are like bait for that other character, Fred/Pete, to like set to like engage with him. And then like when things don't go particularly right, Mystery Man like starts to get rid of the bait characters. Because like that, there's that point near the end where Alice just kind of disappears and it's only Renee as the main feminine character. And then there's also the point at the end where like but like I can say spoilers for the movie.
Spoilers.
I mean, like, because we're talking about the movie, but there's also the part at the end where they finally kill off Mr. Eddie. It's a Dick
Dick
Laurent.
Laurent. Dick Laurent is dead.
Yeah. So I feel like those characters, Mr. Eddie, aka Dick Laurent, and the Alice Renee character are like bait. Like they're not quite NPCs, but they're like character bait for like the Fred Pete character to like try to have conflict with. Like it's like the more I think about it, the more it's like improv comedy or
Right.
improv performance prompts.
They're playing freeze tag.
Right. like like it's something like that. Like basically they're sort of the givers of action in addition to like the mystery man kind of playing God. My partner also suggested that like there could be a vague theory that the mystery man is specifically some kind of vampire because there's a lot of tableau of like the various dead characters like covered in blood, or when there's that kind of tableau of I think it's towards the beginning with Renee's like body looking all mutilated and murdered and stuff like that. Um, so it's not, it could be argued that it's not necessarily just that like Mystery Man is some kind of trope to represent movie director, but that he is potentially vaguely like some type of like menacing vampiric creature. Which, if you're gonna make a comment on like directors and people in power in Hollywood, like that still kind of tracks. Like I could see David Lynch maybe being like, "Hey, get it?" like, about all that kind of thing.
That's, I mean, kudos to us for these interpretations. And this is what's great about the movies. 25 years later, nobody really knows.
Yeah.
And
Well, and it's sorry to interrupt, but I know like after you and I got out of the movie theater a few weeks ago, you and I chatted about it. And like at that time, my theory was a little less intricate than what I just said. My theory was just that Fred, the Bill Pullman character, was a murderer and he experienced a very complex dissociation where at some point in time when he was on death row, he like dissociated and thought he was this young man basically, but that was his sort of like mental escape from his imprisonment like situation. And basically kind of like the second half of a movie is basically like just his dissociation from his given situation.
Which David Lynch has actually said it is a psychogenic fugue, or also known as a dissociative fugue. And
okay, good. So
yeah, so you're right the first time. But I mean, that's my interpretation, although it doesn't explain everything. Now, you know, things that aren't really explained are, and I've heard other theories on this. In that, remember the gruesome scene where the doctor, who kind of resembles Dr. Mengele in the way he does it, throws down some sleeping pills to him, and then he'll sleep now. You know, the theory is okay. That's when the dream starts. And then he becomes, and then I was thinking about it. I'm like, is Balthazar Getty his younger self? Was that him when he was a young man? And or Gary Busey is Gary Busey's father? And then I never even thought about Mr. Eddie being the old man that he will be or he never will be. Although it seems unlikely that he would go from being a saxophonist to a mafia don, but or whatever Mr. Eddie.
Right. Well, I guess more abstractly, I was thinking of that part of it as being like, when you go back to my commentary about like, a lot of it is very like wink, wink, nudge, nudge from David Lynch about, oh, hey, aren't directors assholes? Like, aren't, you know, aren't writers assholes because we like put all our characters through this stuff, you know? If you look at it from that perspective, like I said, it's more that these are like that's more talking about the actual act of character creating and looking at the fact that like there's only a limited number of things to select with. Like there's essentially like or to select from, excuse me. So there's essentially like three major types of men and like maybe two types of like women feminine characters, right? There's like slutty, sexy, femme fatale, and then there's like kind of girl next doorish, Pete's
It's the
girlfriend
eternal
Sheila.
Betty Veronica
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Now, is
And
Alice
yeah,
ever real? That's the other thing, because you see a picture with both of them, and then at the end you just see her.
right. Like that's a great question. I don't I don't have a theory either way on that one.
And going with
But
your
it
director theory, by the way, I
yeah.
saw a YouTube video where somebody, and I never even thought of this because it's, we're talking 90s forgotten media, but
Mhm.
people said that this is David Lynch getting back at Oliver Stone, because Oliver Stone produced the TV miniseries Wild Palms, which was very, very similar to Twin Peaks and has Robert Loggia in it, who plays Dick Laurent, Mr. Eddie, and has a couple scenes that are very similar. Also, cast Balthazar Getty, who was in Natural Born Killers, who played a mechanic in Natural Born Killers, plays a mechanic in this movie. And except for the Twin Peaks, new Twin Peaks, I've never seen him in any other movie or TV show. I know he's been in some, but I've never seen.
Interesting.
And then also there's a scene in Natural Born Killers, which I like too, um, where Juliette Lewis is like, "You want me? Do you want me?" And then at the end, she's like, he says, "I want you. I want you." Now, that doesn't explain the whole movie, but it may explain some scenes. But it's weird to think that so maybe Robert Blake is supposed to be Oliver Stone. I don't know. It's weird to think that David Lynch would be like, "Yeah, I'm gonna write a whole movie just to get back at Oliver Stone because he made a miniseries because that ripped me off." But who knows?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it wasn't so much like Lynch trying to be petty to Oliver Stone as like, hey, this is kind of like in the style of or like riffing on kind
Well,
of
people have
thing.
said that it's riffing on Tarantino too, because
I
the
could see
gore
that. I
and
could
and yeah,
totally see that. Yeah.
basically, I'll make my own Pulp Fiction and make it non-linear, make it better.
Right, right,
Which
right.
don't tell anybody, but I actually think Lost Highway is better than Pulp Fiction. But that's just me.
Yeah, I mean, if we are going
And I like
literal
Pulp
on
Fiction.
the
I like Pulp Fiction.
yeah, if we're going literal on that comparison and that was actually the intent, like then Lynch bested Tarantino on that one. I agree.
I
Totally.
would think, in my opinion, but not to the critics. Matter of fact, Siskel and Ebert famously gave it two thumbs down, and on the poster they put two thumbs down. Another good reason to see Lost Highway.
Whatever. Anti-goth bias.
Yes. So, it's a very gothy movie.
Yeah.
So, and of course, the other theme is that David Lynch has also said that he was very obsessed with the OJ trial, which which everybody in America was, except for me at the time. I remember being sick of it at the time. So the best thing that the OJ trial got us was Lost Highway. The worst thing, probably the Kardashians. But he was and basically he said that what was fascinating to him was that this OJ, in his opinion, killed his wife, and he has suppressed it so much that he doesn't even think he did it. And honestly, what always there's a couple of these that bother me. We talked about it after the movie. Is that every white person thinks he's guilty, every black person thinks he's innocent. That always bothered me, and I remember I've broken up fights because of it in all the years since. The other thing and that's tracked through that's tracked
Well,
to our
and
division now.
you and I finally talked about why that is, because it took me only until like the past decade to understand why that was the case. Even though, yes, OJ was a wealthy and powerful black man, like I can understand why, your average black person, and of course, not everybody has the same opinion or is a monolith, but like I now understand with all of the bias in policing and corruption in the LAPD and all of that, I now understand why that is the case, what you described, that a lot of Black people did think he was innocent.
Well, and this, I mean, and I don't want to, I really don't want to get into the OJ trial, but the
Yeah.
police, whether you think he's guilty or not, admittedly planted evidence.
Mm-hmm.
One, two, what I've always found odd about the case, and I've talked about this to Black and white people, and nobody has an answer to this. They never ever considered another suspect. His son, his best friend, and Marcus Allen, who had an affair with Nicole, all fit the same description. They all drive the same exact car. And I just recently watched a documentary, which was interesting, and it could be bullshit, it could not be, but it was interesting and laid out the case that OJ ordered her murder and actually named the guy that they said committed the murder as a white guy who was in jail, and he confessed to it on his deathbed. Like, he hired a hitman. The reason that there was some blood on him was because he was there, but he didn't actually do it, which is plausible. But I don't know. I don't know enough about it. I don't know all the evidence, and I didn't follow it. I was sick of everybody. It's like today. Everybody talks about Trump 24 hours a day. Everybody's talking to OJ 24 hours a day back then.
Right.
And it's like there's other things going on. There's more interesting things to talk about, like Lost Highway.
Exactly.
And the ironic thing about the movie is the next big celebrity that had a murder trial was Robert Blake, which you were not aware of this when you
I
watched
was
the movie
totally
until I
ignorant
talked
about that.
afterwards.
And yeah, what's interesting is, like, when you told me that as we were coming out of the movie, I was not aware of that. But what's interesting is that in my head, I had mixed up Robert Blake and his trial, which apparently occurred like through most of the 2000s, with somebody pretty high profile who was a murderer and was actually convicted in criminal court.
Spector?
No, somebody who had a really high profile case that like began during the pandemic and was like being broadcast high profile during the pandemic. I don't remember who it was.
But yeah, so that's the ultimate irony. Robert Blake never did a movie again. Obviously, he couldn't get a movie now, but then there was still like 5 or 10 years after this movie. I shouldn't say this, and also the theory is that he could be a vampire, he could be a director. I've also heard say he was pure evil. That's why he could be at two places at once.
Mm-hmm.
He was at the the guy's party that was the porn producer, and he was also at his house because he's pure evil.
Right.
But his performance gave me chills. It still gives me chills every time I see it. Just every time he's on screen and starts talking, it's like, ooh.
Oh yeah, it's very eerie. And I mean, again, what you just described with him being in two places at once, because I considered that too. For me, that was more just like, ha ha ha. To me, that was more supporting like the ha ha, I'm the director, I'm omnipotent. Like,
right.
I can be anywhere my characters are because I can, because I made them. Like, you're literally God, So
yeah, apparently, and David Lynch was a fan of his acting. He was, he's a guy that's before our time, but he was Beretta in the 70s. He was a big star. He apparently in Cold Blood, which I've read the book, I've never seen the movie. Apparently, he's amazing in. And I remember when I was a kid, he played Jimmy Hoffa in a TV movie. And I've seen Jack Nicholson and Al Pacino play Jimmy Hoffa since, and I thought he was better. But his performance is creepy, but it's like doubly creepy now that he's like he could be a murderer. Although I looked into the case, and there's not. I would say there's no smoking gun, but there was gun residue on his hands, and he went to the restaurant to get his gun, which is a weird defense.
Yeah, that is the weirdest defense I've heard.
But how he got off apparently is that they said that there was another gun that ballistics matched to the bullets, and that wasn't it. So I don't know. He also had motive because apparently they were about to get a divorce, and she got pregnant when he didn't want her to, all sorts of things. So I don't want to get into it, but I honestly, it's and David Lynch also says his favorite scene in the movie, which is kind of laughable, kind of not. It's kind of creepy and laughable at the same time. Is when Patricia Arquette turns around and it's got Robert Blake's face on her body. And
Yeah. And
which
that's like a blink and you'll miss it moment too.
oh no, I noticed it every time.
Yeah.
So, but just I want to run. So it was his last movie. It's Richard Pryor's last movie. Obviously, he was on his last legs. And Jack Nance, who played Eraserhead, was the old guy in the garage with the mustache who was turning off the radio. It was his last movie. He
Interesting.
died in the weirdest way because apparently somebody noticed he had a black eye one day. He's like, "Oh, I got in a fight at a donut shop," and then the next day they found him dead, like just an aneurysm. So
Wow.
very strange. But he was in he was in every David Lynch movie until he died. So and then they brought him back in flashbacks for the Twin Peaks miniseries. But Bill Pullman is an actor I liked a lot. He's very subdued in this movie because I've seen him go really
Mhm.
crazy in movies, but I think he's good in the movie, and I've always liked him. Uh, except for Spaceballs, he just sort of doesn't register in Spaceballs. But Serpent and the Rainbow and other things, and a movie that was directed by David Lynch's daughter, Surveillance, he's really good in. But he was in this is coming off Independence Day, so that he was the big star. Probably got the big movie financed.
Right.
What do you think of Bill Pullman?
I like him as an actor also. Yeah, I couldn't recall a lot of stuff that he was in aside from Independence Day, but that was randomly a movie at the time that I saw in the theater a bunch of times in a row just because I think it came out like the summer between middle and high school and it was like bored teenager syndrome and so like me and
And
my
Jeff
friends just
Goldblum's in it.
yeah, me and my friends just kind of like stayed in the theater and like watched it a few times, like
Yeah,
back to back. I can't remember,
a
but
huge hit.
yeah, I definitely like him as an actor.
This was kind of the peak of his popularity at
Mhm.
Independence Day, and he was in that Sandra Bullock movie, and then he was also the year before this movie. I think he was in a movie with Ellen DeGeneres' big movie, Mr. Wrong, which prompted every hack comedian to, of course, he's Mr. Wrong. She's a lesbian, it's that kind of thing. So, which I've never seen, but
Oh my god. Yeah. No, I didn't see that. Like, yeah, I remember him at the time just kind of being in a lot of movies of seemed like different types of genres,
yeah,
you
he pops
know?
around. Yeah, I mean, when
Yeah.
you go from Spaceballs to Serpent and the Rainbow to Independence Day to Lost Highway, you're
Yeah.
bouncing around.
Yeah, and of course, I'm a huge fan of the movie Spaceballs, so, like,
Are you
he
really?
could have he could have just rolled out of bed and done that movie, and that would have been fine. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I didn't
I
know
used
that.
to be able to quote it from, like, at least 50% of that movie.
So I totally dissed him in Spaceballs, but you liked him.
Yeah, he was a little bit of, like, a straight man in Spaceballs, right?
Yeah, he was like too much of a straight man for my taste.
Yeah.
But yeah, While You Were Sleeping was a big hit. He was in
Uh-huh.
Casper. I forgot that. Casper. He's in Casper. I'm looking through his, and then yeah, he's sort of, yeah, it's sort of downhill from there. That was kind of his peak was the mid, 93. He was in Summersby, Sleepless in Seattle, which I've never seen. Malice, Mr. Jones, The Favor, Wyatt Earp, While You Were Sleeping, Casper, Mr. Wrong, Independence Day, Lost Highway, and it kind of goes down from there. But Patricia Arquette also big mid '90s, and this was at her
Yeah.
peak. But she was in Nightmare on Elm Street 3. We all liked that. And then she kind of fluttered around. And True Romance was a big break for her to me. And then she was in Ed Wood. True Romance, she's great. Ed Wood, she's great. And Flirting with Disaster, she was great. Lost Highway, and then Stigmata was a big hit. And then sort of she was in Little Nicky with Adam Sandler. Okay, I don't remember that, but and then she kind of honestly sort of floundered until Boyhood won her the Oscar. But I've always liked her.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, she's great and, like, very much, like, awesome sex symbol in this movie.
Patricia Arquette always has these heels on, these huge heels.
Mhm,
Even when she wakes up in the morning and gets the paper, she's got these huge clunky heels on.
mhm.
Is that his imagination idealizing her, or is it she just likes big clunky heels? And she's a short actress, I would imagine. That's probably the practical reason for wearing
Yeah, that one's hard to say, but that goes back to my theory a little bit of like there are only so many types of like feminine and masculine characters in this movie, and that one female type is just very sex symbol, very high femme, you know.
it. It's weird in 2022 to see this much nudity in a movie. Sex and
Mm,
nudity.
I think I remember talking about that with my partner when we rewatched it recently. It is kind of verging on the gratuitous. Yeah, it's like, all right, like here's some
There is some slow
titties.
motion booby action,
Yeah, yeah,
and it,
it's very indulgent in that. But you know, at the same time, like I support the normalizing of human bodies. Like I think yeah, but it is coming from an interesting place, and kind of a when it's a male director, it's you always have to wonder a little bit. But yeah, I guess you're right. Like
it's
that is unusual.
it's not unusual to see it at home, HBO, Showtime, Game of Thrones. You see sex
Right.
all the time, but to see it up on the screen, it used to be the norm. I mean, I guess in the
Yeah.
'60s when the Hays Code went out, just there was nudity. '60s, '70s, '80s, '90s, 2000s a little bit, and it just kind of
Right.
stopped.
Right. Like remember when like even 80s movies that were just R-rated had like gratuitous like
PG
toplessness?
movies, PG movies had gratuitous topless scenes.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, like, I remember, like, Basic Instinct, everybody loved it. I mean, it's
Oh
just crazy
yeah.
stuff. And then it just kind of phased out. I don't know. It just,
Yeah.
but it was weird
Huh.
because, yeah. So I know people tittered at some of the nudity and sex.
Yeah.
Some of these crazy kids these days.
Yeah, I know. These kids are more uptight than we were.
No, they are. But anyway, my favorite
Yeah,
Arquette, although
it's
I did meet Alexis and she was very nice, but Patricia Arquette, as far as acting, is my favorite.
yeah. I definitely heard of all those movies you mentioned, and I didn't get around to seeing a whole lot of them, but some of them were like heavy hitters, and I
You never saw
remember.
True Romance?
No, unfortunately, I haven't.
Oh, you
Believe it or
should.
not.
You should. It's really good. But I don't know. Yeah, I haven't seen it in a while. I don't know.
I have seen. I believe I saw most, if not all, of Ed Wood, but it's one of those
that's
weird
another
things.
one too.
Like that, I watched that during like a fairly like stonery part of my early 20s, and I think it was one of those things where it was like either I was watching part of it and then the person, probably my partner at the time who I was watching it with, was like, "Oh, I have a copy of like Plan 9 from Outer Space on Laserdisc. Remember those kids?"
Oh wow.
Like I think he was like, "Yeah, I have like a copy of Plan 9. Let's just watch Plan 9 cuz why not?" So, I think I have seen like part or parts of the movie Ed Wood. I don't entirely recall whether I've watched it from start to finish.
That's another great movie I would
Yeah.
recommend. Yeah, I really like. She's actually not. She doesn't have a big part. I mean, she's the Ed Wood was married to one woman at the beginning of his life, and then another woman at the end of his life. She's the one at the end of life, but
Mhm.
they don't give her a lot to do, which is unfortunate. But
Mhm.
it's kind of the girlfriend role. But that's an amazing movie. But to get into technology, we were talking about this. I think in the theater because this is so weird to watch millennials and Gen Y audience look at like all this old technology that we remember. The
Yeah.
camcorders, he takes out a phone that's like this big.
Right. Right. Like
Just videotapes is
yes. Yes. We were joking around like every time they pulled out a piece of like obsolete technology, we were like, "Hey kids, this is called a VHS."
yeah. and VHS was on the way out then. I think DVD was coming out at that time, but
Mhm, mhm.
well, actually, VHS is making a big comeback. People are liking it. Cassettes, VHS, like every old technology is coming back now. But
Oh, yeah. Oh,
oh,
yeah, like, as somebody who does glitch art, like, all of that CRT TV stuff and, like, running the lines through CRT so you can get some cool glitch effects, like, yeah, it's
but
definitely
I mean, when they use a payphone, they
yeah.
what else? What other obsolete technology did they do? It was like the videotape, and then and then there was the payphone.
Landline, there's a
Oh
landline.
yeah, there's a landline. Yeah, that was. I think that was the first thing. It's like somebody called them on a landline.
Yeah, there's an old school camcorder, obviously, you mentioned that
Yeah,
already.
and
Uh,
the phone that Robert Blake pulls out, and it's like this big,
yeah, like,
huge.
super OG cell phone.
It's like as big as this movie right here. It's like,
Right, right.
hello, yes.
Right.
How'd you get my house?
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
read. Yeah. Anyway, but it's a yeah, it's a big. It's great for that old tech. And it's so weird. Like it seems like yesterday that I was in high school watching the movie for the first time, and now
Mhm.
25 years later, and all the technology is obsolete. We're getting old.
Oh, yeah.
But as but yeah, Richard Pryor's his last movie, and and then when we saw it, Gary Busey comes on the screen, and this is before the allegations. I don't want to get into that, but the whole audience started laughing at Gary Busey,
Right.
like literally, and he's completely serious in this movie, and I think does a.
Yeah.
He's I actually I remember the first time I saw it, I said he's the most normal character in the whole movie. He's like the only guy I can relate to. He's just a regular dad.
That's true. He's very, very straight man, very normal character in the movie. Yeah, and it's
And
interesting because it's
it's
like,
him, and he's not normal and not.
I don't right, I don't know that much about Gary Busey. I just know that well, I remember when he had a reality show with his son or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, he had like
For
yeah on Comedy Central, so he just played up like that. He's crazy. The thing about
yeah.
Gary Busey um, was he A Stars one was like his big breakthrough, and then he did the
Mhm.
Buddy Holly story, was nominated for an Oscar. He did a lot of movies in the '80s, and I think in the late '80s, early '90s, he got in a motorcycle accident, did not have a helmet on.
Yes, I was aware of that, and I feel like following that, like, he had a lot of behavioral changes that
Yes,
happened.
yes. But he still, even after that, he still was, he's Lethal Weapon, Point Break. He was still the firm. He was still a good actor, I don't know what caused David Lynch to cast it, but I think it's good casting in that he's such a weird, unstable guy playing a
Right,
normal guy. It's just
exactly.
casting against type, and it's really good casting.
Yeah.
Richard Pryor at the time was in a wheelchair, had multiple sclerosis, really bad. I'm actually wearing my Richard Pryor shirt tonight, but
Aw.
and you cheered when Richard Pryor came on,
Yeah.
and people, yeah, and you forgot he was in the movie.
I totally had forgotten that he was in the movie, but that was nice.
And he's only in the movie for a couple scenes, but I guess the second scene where he's talking on the phone was totally improv. And
Mhm.
from the interview I saw with David Lynch, he said that he didn't have anything written. He said just go on the phone and we'll improv something. And I guess he went off for like 20 minutes, and they cut that into the movie. So it was his last movie, Jack Nance and Robert Blake, and then um, it's oh yeah, and Balthazar Getty. Like I said, I saw him in Natural Born Killers. I saw him in this movie. I don't know what happened to him, but I guess I did look that up on Wikipedia. He's been in a lot of TV shows, but he never became a big star.
So, like, okay, is he a Getty as in, like, rich people Gettys?
He's a Getty and like rich people Getty.
Okay, okay. I was curious about that.
And the story is that you know, uh, just Oliver Stone theory aside, the official word is that David Lynch saw him in a magazine and said that's him.
Interesting.
So, and he's the fantasy guy, he's the fuck boy, and
Yeah.
and the cops following him around every time he's having sex with all these girls.
Right, right.
It's
They're like, "He
hilarious.
gets more pussy than a toilet seat."
Which I don't even get that line. I know you get more ass in the toilet seat. Does the toilet seat get pussy? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, But those cops, I love those cops. I love the. It's a '90s movie, so Henry Rollins has to be in it. So
Yes.
it's different. But I think the guy that's the other prison guard that finds Balthazar Getty, and his delivery is was hilarious to me.
Yeah, those
Fuck
two
me.
characters. Those
Yeah.
two characters are really funny.
Yeah.
At first, I know it's not him, but at first I thought the other prison guard was Flea. It's not though,
that
right?
would have been weird casting. And then, of course, you booed when Marilyn Manson made his brief appearance.
Yeah.
and which we're going to segue into the soundtrack now because he's on the soundtrack.
Right.
His appearance as and he's only in it for like 10 seconds as a porn star who apparently gets killed because it's a porn snuff film, which,
right.
When you're jerking off, you really want to see somebody dying, but I
think for that portion of the movie, David Lynch just went up to Marilyn Manson and was like, "So, what do you like to do in your free time?"
Well, could be, and then and Twiggy's in there too. Twiggy Ramirez, the bass player for Marilyn Manson, who was problematic himself, but like I said, you didn't know about Robert Blake. I told you, and I didn't even want to get into Richard Pryor and Gary Busey because there's things I know that I don't know if you want to know. But basically, everybody in this movie is problematic. And David Lynch has been married and divorced like 5 times. He's got 5 different. He and Richard Pryor have both have like 5 or 6 different children with 5 or 6 different women. David Lynch was married to the editor of Lost Highway at the time.
Interesting.
And divorced her, and he's got kids with 5 different. It seems like every decade he marries somebody new and has another child. So he's quite the fuckboy.
So if you ever want to know my definition of a manther,
David Lynch is a manther.
That is that criteria probably qualifies.
Isn't he a granter now?
Oh yeah, at this point in time, yeah.
But he's still knocking them out. So good for him. He's made more babies than movies in the last 20 years. But you just saw 9 Inch Nails in concert, and I saw the set list. It looked great, and
it was great actually. I got to see them twice. The first one was kind of like a short vacation that my partner and I planned for and saved up for. And we saw them at Red Rocks in Denver. It was excellent. And then shortly thereafter, what's that?
Red Rocks is a great place to see a concert. I lived in Denver, so I've been to Red Rocks. It's great.
Yeah, it was a very, very cool venue. Bit of a hike for folks who have mobility things going on. It is, you definitely have to kind of be comfortably mobile, but and then once we came back, because I've been really active on the 9 Inch Nails Discord server, and there happened to be an individual. So I'll just say this: I'm not gonna like name anyone's real names or anything like that. But part of what has existed on the 9 Inch Nails Discord is there is a sub channel for sobriety support for people. And even though I'm not like officially a sober person, been through like the anonymous programs and stuff like that, I'm somewhat trained in peer support techniques. So a while back, I ended up like hopping on that forum just to like, help be supportive to folks. And a lot of folks also were like inspired by Trent Reznor's sobriety journey on there. So anyway, we have a group of us regulars who just kind of chat with each other on there. And one of the folks who's on that channel regularly DM'd me one day and was just like, "Hey, so like I've got 2 pit tickets to the Santa Barbara Bowl show, and I was gonna sell them, but I'd rather give them away to like somebody who I know will appreciate them." And I was like, "Holy shit, are you serious?" So this very generous person gifted my partner and I tickets to the Santa Barbara Bowl show that just happened. And that was the set list that you saw me post on social media.
That's great. And the irony being that person was Marilyn Manson, but no, of course not.
No.
But no, it's weird because I saw 9 Inch Nails in 2018, but I also saw them at their quote unquote final show in 2009.
Right. I have that T-shirt. Yeah, I actually
I
have
have it
that
too.
T-shirt as
Were you
well.
there? Were you there?
Hmm.
Yeah, I was at
Yeah,
that.
I think it was called the Wave Goodbye tour. And I think what ended up happening, I might be mistaken about this, but I think it was a point in time where like some folks were going in different directions. I know Trent was shifting gears, and like I think honestly at the time, this is just an assumption because he's a pretty private person, but I think at the time what was happening is like he was maybe deciding that he wanted to start a family at the time.
Hmm.
So I think he knew that the nature of his work was going to change or
Right.
step back for a little bit. So
Well, he had a band with his wife. That
yeah.
he tried that, but I was up
Yeah.
in the balcony, and it was weird. It was a weird crowd up the balcony because uh, Penn Jillette was there with Ron Jeremy, and Tony Kanal from No Doubt was there, and I actually bumped fists with Eddie Van Halen.
Wow.
But he, people didn't recognize him because he had short hair, and I was like, yeah, I gave him the horns. I was like, hey Eddie, and then
Nice.
so I bumped fists with him, and he's like, and somebody in the crowd's like, who's that? I'm like, that's Eddie Van Halen. He's like, that's Eddie Van Halen, because he didn't look the same.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I too, at an earlier Nine Inch Nails show, I think like maybe 1 or 2 years previous, I too have run into Ron Jeremy at a Nine Inch Nails show.
right,
But not to give him a bunch of airtime right now, but that guy was definitely the man about town at like every fucking thing going on for a while in the LA area. Like you were bound to run into him.
sure. But my whole point is that that show was like 3 hours, and they had so many guests: Gary Newman, Dillinger
Right.
Escape Plan, all these. When I saw him in 2018, it was like it was weird because it was a small show at the Hollywood Palladium.
Hmm. We
Uh,
were at that one too. Yeah.
yeah, so you're probably so I'm like getting pushed around, and it's like it was like I don't know. After seeing the grand finale, it was just a little bit of a letdown. But this soundtrack is not a letdown, and that's a lot to do with Trent Reznor, beginning with the David Bowie song that begins and closes the movie, "I'm Deranged," which I think is great.
Oh yes, that's just
We
like
how secrets
that
travel.
is pretty much one of my favorite more recent Bowie songs. And it is the album that I believe that's from, if I'm not mistaken, which was called Outside. I
Outside,
think it was
yes.
on the Outside album. Like, that was one of those ones that was hugely monumentally inspiring for Trent Reznor. And Nine Inch Nails actually has a song called God Break Down the Door that,
Mhm.
like, you can clearly hear the continuous line from that particular era of Bowie to this somewhat more recent song of Nine Inch Nails. Like it's clearly just kind of like a tribute song, and it's beautiful.
Well,
And
they toured together
yeah.
around this time too. Nine Inch Nails and David Bowie.
Oh yeah.
And I'll be honest, I've seen if you ever see David Bowie singing "Hurts" with Nine Inch Nails,
Hmm.
it makes Johnny Cash's verses sound like a piece of shit. I got to be honest in comparison, but that's just me.
I think that the Bowie Nine Inch Nails tour was, if I'm not mistaken, my very first time seeing Nine Inch Nails.
Hmm.
I might have been in like 8th grade at the time or something like
Yeah, you
that.
were really young. I was.
But holy shit, like that, I would consider that it was the Great Western Forum. That was one of like the all-time best concerts of my
Now
existence.
let me ask you, since we're talking about Bowie, who, by the way, is the last cool white man there ever has been. I can't think of a cool white man now since he died. Like everybody, like if he walks into any room, people are like, okay, that dude's cool, just effortlessly. Like Johnny Depp was cool at one time, he's not cool anymore. There's other people that were cool at one time, they're not cool anymore. David Bowie
Yeah.
was always cool, but the Nine Inch Nails David Bowie tour, David Bowie fans were disappointed because he didn't do like Let's Dance and all the hits
You're talking about the
when he toured Nine Inch
the
Nails.
tour? Yeah. No, he didn't. He was doing it more to support, I think, newer material of his, if I
Right.
remember correctly.
If I
So during
remember,
that
people were
time,
really
it was
disappointed.
yeah, during that time, it was both that Outside album, which was
Hmm.
very kind of like experimental jazz influenced.
Which I've never heard. Is it good?
Please go listen to it.
All right.
It's
Okay.
like performance art jazz. Like it's a concept album and it has a plot line. It's
Okay.
fucking cool.
All
Like
right. All right. I've
highly,
never. I
highly
love I'm
recommend.
deranged, but I've never listened to the album.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. And then I don't know that Earthling was out yet, but what came out immediately after that tour with the two of them, which is, I believe, close to the era when I'm Afraid of Americans collab came out,
Yeah.
was Bowie trying to take more of like a drum and bass, like breakbeats kind of
Hmm.
approach to his music. So he was kind of like hopping on that bandwagon.
But I remember
I
Earthling. I've heard that.
Yeah, I personally enjoyed that album as well. But yeah,
And so yeah. So and now, did Nine Inch Nails do the Perfect Drug when you saw them?
they did the Perfect Drug at Santa Barbara. They didn't do it at
Okay.
Red Rock.
All right.
Yeah, they're making on this tour, they are making an effort to really change it up. They have some anchor songs
Hmm.
every night, like Hurt is definitely closing every night. And what they do with the lighting setup for Hurt is just like beautiful. But they are really trying to change it up every show, which I think is great.
Well, I was envious because I saw the track list and there was a lot of fragile material on there, and that's my favorite.
Yeah, at the Santa Barbara show, they did a really decent chunk of songs from Broken through the Fragile, and
Hmm.
that's the peak of their work in a lot of ways, and I really appreciated that. Fragile is like one of my faves. So
And another song that I really like is probably, I would say, if it's not my favorite Smashing Pumpkin song, it's in the top five. Is I.
yeah, it's definitely like iconic. Like when I think back to that late 90s era, I think of that song, but I also like it because for the Pumpkins, it was very like goth and synth, and it kind
Yes.
of was this like doorway into, I believe not long after that they made a much more synthy album.
Right. Well,
Um I,
when they were big, Siamese Dream, Melancholy, and they were all over radio and MTV, and I think just getting into high school. I wasn't into them. I didn't get it. When Adore came out, which was the album right after this that you're talking about, then I got into them a little bit, and really, after they broke up, I started listening to the old albums. And I'm like, it's really good.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
but yeah, Ava Adore sounds almost like but I think I was good. And I don't know if Trent had any hand in that song, but it kind of sounds like he could have. I mean, it sort of has an industrial sort of thing. And I've heard I in goth clubs, by the way.
Oh
So
yeah, so have I.
they throw that
So
out
have
every now.
I.
They throw that out, but it's definitely it's a lot of people's favorite Smashing Pumpkin songs. I know a lot of people that like that song that don't like them, but they like that
Mhm.
one. This Magic Moment by Lou Reed, I'm not a Lou Reed fan, but it does fit that scene.
Yeah, it it's kind of, yeah, it was a good choice for that particular scene, and I do actually like Lou Reed's music. I thought that was a nice pick as well.
It's I don't hate it, but I've never been a huge. I like some Velvet Underground, but solo Lou Reed I've never gotten into. But and then you get to the Apple of Sodom by Marilyn Manson, which I actually think is a good song. Putting aside Marilyn Manson, but and once again, it's kind
Honestly,
of
I won't disagree with you.
it's
Like,
a low key song for him too.
right, like all of the drama
Yeah,
aside, just
just
looking at the music, I actually tend to agree with you.
and it fits the scene.
Yeah.
And by the way, the Smashing Pumpkin song is them going into a bowling alley, and I've never been to a bowling alley where they played I, but and also
Definitely.
Marilyn Manson's "I Put a Spell on You" fits that scene too.
Yeah.
And it is a creepy version of that song. And there's another song, and I think it's Something Wicked that This Way Comes, where they they scratch in it's the one at the party that fades out when
Yes.
Blake's there. Uh,
Barry Adamson.
yes, well, it's like some old '60s song that they sort of
Yeah.
remix, and it's strange, strange, yeah. And then it fades out and fades back in. And the other thing about the soundtrack, and I remember at the time, this was a real just a real wake up call. Was first time I ever heard Rammstein was on the Lost Highway soundtrack, and it was
Yes.
really like
Yes.
I really became a fan right away. And I remember this is
Although
pre Du Hast.
I definitely think that like Rammstein, the song that they picked, like it's its own character in the movie.
Rammstein.
like it's its own character in the movie. It is completely intrusive.
Oh, absolutely. It's it's the scene where he's all disoriented and he goes and this is yeah, it's so weird. But in 1997, I never heard anything quite like.
Yeah.
And at the time they were nothing, and then Du Hast came out, and now they're playing stadiums. So and the other song that is not on the soundtrack but is very featured in the movie. Now this is what the 4K thing. I didn't think added anything. I didn't see anything that was that clear, and I think some of it was grainy too. I
Hmm.
didn't think it was like I wasn't wowed by the visuals in the 4K. But I'm like I'm always somebody that's suspect of technology anyway, and I don't have a Blu-ray player. DVD's fine for me,
Hmm.
but the sound was definitely enhanced, and it's to the point that I did not remember all the times I've seen this movie before that they played "Song to the Siren" by This Mortal Coil. The first time they make love, and Fred has impotence,
Hmm. Hmm.
and then they bring it back around. I remember at the end when Balthazar Getty and her are getting it on, and do you want me, and I
Hmm.
want you, and you'll never have me. So it was really jarring to hear that.
Yeah, I did not recall that either. I mean,
It was very
again,
faint
like,
too.
huh?
It was very faint too.
Yeah, yeah. That's one of those like Berenstain moments that was
Yeah,
like,
and
was
this is
this
the
in the
Mandela effect. Yeah,
original one? Like, yeah.
yeah. It was a very Mandela effect, but I think it was buried in the original mix and is back on now. This is we can talk all night about this, but we're going to wrap it up a little bit. But I did want to say this was on VHS, which was the technology at the time, but it didn't get released on DVD for like 10 years.
Hmm.
I remember I always wanted to get a DVD; they didn't have it. I remember I was in Canada and they had a DVD in Canada,
Right, you told me about that.
and I so wanted this on DVD. I ordered a copy on eBay that was like a South Korean copy, but
Uh-huh.
played in American DVD players. And then when I ordered that, literally like 6 months later, they released it on DVD.
Interesting. Yeah, and now that you mention that and that whole process of like how long it took them to release on DVD, I'm thinking back because funny enough, when I like went and rewatched it recently, I was like, oh my God, I could have swore I like actually had a DVD copy of this movie. I think my copy of it is on VHS.
Hmm.
Not totally sure where that is, but now that you mentioned that whole process that it took so
I see
long, I'm like,
CDs and other
yeah.
old media behind you, so I don't know. It could be somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. Well, those aren't mine, but yeah.
Right. Well,
I still have all my I have my old stuff and I do have a few VHSs. I still have the VHS tape recording of like the MTV news that announced Kurt Cobain's suicide.
oh wow,
So, yeah, that's somewhere in my collection. I gotta look
wow.
for it, but yeah, and some old Beavis and Butthead tapes.
See, we're back in the '90s. It was.
Right.
Would you agree with me? And I've had a couple people say this. The '90s were really the last definitive decade
The
where you can say,
last
"Oh, that
what?
definitive decade," where you can say, "Oh yeah, that's '90s," and it
Um,
went through a lot of changes.
the only pushback against that I would give is like I think the last real like movement or aesthetic we had was maybe in the early 2000s, like emo and scene kids having like a mainstream moment. Like that was kind of a moment that was post 90s. I'm not saying it was good necessarily.
But emo and scene kids were just like kind of like popular goths. Like they wanted to
Yeah,
go goth, but they couldn't quite go that far. They tried
right.
to make like garage rock a thing, and that didn't work. That didn't stick.
Right, like the hipster, like garage, yeah, neo garage rock kind
But
of.
even like emo and garage rock and all that still
Mhm.
harkened back to older movements. You know, it sort of was like,
Mm.
but I don't know. I just and I went to a 2000s club recently, and it was very strange. And and
Yeah,
we're still.
I'm still too scared to like.
It's hard to dance to My Chemical Romance, but people were doing it. But it's hard to, and we're still stuck in the 80s. Like the 90s. There's still some 90s nostalgia, but it's still we're going back to the 80s.
Yeah.
But
Now we're going back, I think because of like Stranger Things, now we're going back to like early to mid 80s nostalgia, like full blown mullets are back.
yeah, oh yeah,
I'm not sure how I feel about that.
yeah. Who doesn't like a mullet? Well, I mean that's the thing. You got if Kate Bush has the number one song, and that's a good thing. You gotta get the mullets
Yeah,
fast.
I love that. I love that. I
There you
love all the 80s music.
go.
But yeah.
But so so the Lost Highway. So my interpretation is, and it took me a long time to figure it out, is that um, he did kill her. And the other another thing I saw recently that I didn't notice was all the videotapes. They're not they're not taped like a guy holding a videotape. They're all from above. The videotapes of him killing his wife are all from above, which is strange. Which
Mhm.
also begs the question: is Robert Blake God? Really? So,
Could
but
be.
my interpretation is that, but if he was God, he'd be in another movie since 1997. But my interpretation is that so he's a guy that his marriage is falling apart, and I've never been in a relationship that's been gone on long enough that I've been in those doldrums, but I know a lot of people who have, and I don't really know why he kills her. It's that's not really explained, but he kills her, he goes to prison, and then the second half of the movie where he turns into Balthazar Getty is his idyllic life while he's waiting for the electric chair, and then at the end when his head's shaking, he's dying.
Mhm.
And you know the other thing, but now that you talked about it, I'm like thinking of see, I always come up with new interpretations. Now that you talked about it, you're like, well, are they all the same person? Is Balthazar Getty, Bill Pullman, and Robert Loggia, who I didn't even talk about, but he's great. Are they the same person? He goes in and says Dick Laurence is dead. Is he Dick Laurence?
Is is the mystery man Nick
Is
Laurent?
Bill Pullman Dick Laurence?
Oh, okay. Uh I mean, my understanding was that Mr. Eddie was AKA Dick Laurent
Right.
because they only start to say that like after they specifically like show them killing off Mr. Eddie.
Right.
Um, but
So
yeah,
him going and the whole Dick Laurence is dead thing actually happened to David Lynch. Somebody went to his intercom, said Dick Laurence is dead. He went to the door, nobody was there. So he
that's
wrote it.
creepy.
Yeah. So, and I guess he was neighbors with the actor David Lander, who played Squiggy on Laverne and Shirley.
Hmm.
His name was David, so he thinks somebody was actually trying to tell Squiggy that Dick Laurent is dead. So I don't know.
Interesting.
But I will tell you, I mean, regardless of interpretation, this is one of my favorite movies, and it was great to see it on the big screen again. And
Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
I was actually before you posted it, I was going to go to Glendale to see it because they had released it like the month before in
Uh-huh.
Glendale, and then I'm glad I got to see it with somebody. I got to see it with a Gen Y crowd that was laughing at Gary Busey and befuddled by they were laughing at some weird, inappropriate parts,
They
and also
were.
and also befuddled by the technology. I'm trying to think what other thing they were laughing at that wasn't supposed to be funny, but it was weird, yeah. And the theater that we saw it in, the Los Feliz 3, which is 2 blocks from here, was built in 1934, so it was a good theater to see it in, even
Mhm.
though our seats weren't the best, but they were good enough. What are your last thoughts on Lost Time?
I personally would say, like, actually, this is kind of my attitude towards all of David Lynch is like, don't analyze it too hard, just be in the art of it. And hey, it's fun to like have these theories about the plot line and who the characters are, but I feel like with David Lynch, it's also just more of a flavor. Like you're chewing on these flavors of David Lynch being David Lynch. And it's really funny because actually, before I reached out to you, or you and I chatted about you coming to see the movie with me, I reached out to another friend of mine who's slightly older. Like, I guess you could say that they're in the Gen X category. And they're a
Hmm.
huge film buff, like really, really like could tell you the plot lines of this, that, and the other. I don't know if they have like academic background in it or whatever, but anyway, like I reached out and I was like, "Hey, would you like to see this?" And they said no because they're like, as much of a David Lynch fan as I am, I feel like in that movie, he's just like David Lynch trying to do David Lynch. like,
That's a
like,
lot. A lot of people say that, and it's interesting that Mulholland Drive, which is very similar,
yeah,
his next movie, was so overpraised. I don't know about overpraised. I like it, but
yeah,
it was like nominated for Oscars. Every critic
right,
just
right, right.
Roger Ebert never gave him any good review until Mulholland Drive and said it was like the best movie of the year. And
Yeah,
to me, they're very similar movies
agreed. Yeah,
and both good. But there's something about Lost Highway. As I told you, Mulholland Drive is easier to explain for me. And the last thing I'm going to say, and then I'll let you plug what you want. But the last thing I want to say is that I even though I love David Lynch movies, I think this may be why I love David Lynch movies is I don't remember my dreams a lot. So when it has these weird dream sequences and these weird like I think it's me it's because I don't dream like that myself. Very rarely do I remember a dream when I wake up, and when I do, it is scattered. But do you dream like
mhm.
that?
Very rarely these days. I feel like I used to maybe more in the past, but very rarely. Yeah, I don't remember as much these days. So yeah, I mean that goes back to what I was saying about it's really about the aesthetic with a lot of what David Lynch does. And I feel like with this movie in particular, with Lost Highway, like it was very much a pop culture moment, just like with that
Oh yeah.
convergence of the people, like the actors in the movie, how the soundtrack was curated, and all of that. Like it was just like it was a peak 90s moment, in my opinion.
If you talk about 1997, this is it.
yeah.
And well, thank you for being on. Anything you want to plug, please plug. Let the people want to know what you got going on and how to see your glitch art and all that.
Yeah, so my collab with my partner is MMIX_art on Instagram. We also, specifically for that collab work, have a Patreon that you can support, and it's like all the links are in the bio there and everything like that. I do perform solo as well. I've been doing stand up this year, so you can find me at LL Faunt on my own solo Instagram. And yeah, that's pretty much
Okay.
it. All my links are in my like bio things on all the places. So
Well, it's always a delight to talk to you, and it's I'm glad we got to finally really talk about this movie at length because it's one of my favorites, and I can't really explain why, but it is.
agreed. Yeah, this is definitely not just one of my faves, but I'm a big Lynch fan, and definitely, like you were saying, like peak mid 90s pop culture moment, in my opinion.
So thanks for being on, and I am Goth Comedian on all social media. Everybody, have a wonderfully creepy week.
Thank you
Bye.
so much, Dark Mark. Good night,
Thanks.
everybody.
Night.
Bye.